everybody is doing well today. I am doing good. Trying to make sure that everything is put together right as I get set up and come in. Usually takes me just a minute or two. Today, the moment we start getting very large and commenty, I'm probably going to turn us on to sub only, just because of the fact that we've been having problems otherwise, as I try and get the chat settled down again and safe again for everybody, just so that we can ensure that we're not losing space to speak, and that we're not allowing it to become an unsafe space for anybody else either. Of course, if we don't start out really large, I won't have to go over the huge spiel either, which can become a little bit hard sometimes, a little bit easier others. But it's important to me to maintain a safe space for everybody. Safety for myself is really what it is for myself. Oh, we're already there. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. So I need to maintain a safe space, especially with the way that this has been going down lately. And so I'm going to keep it on some only for a while. I will open up chat to everybody so that it can be, questions can be asked. It's very important to me that questions are askable, right? For me, I believe that we learn most by asking questions, right? By being curious and by trying to find out more information. And so I want to make sure that everybody has that opportunity. But I also want to make sure that everybody is safe, right? And unfortunately, we're living in a space and a time when certain people don't feel the need to maintain safe space for everybody. They're pretty, involved in their own thought processes, right? Which is something that we kind of discuss in here a little bit, in the fact of how we can change that, right? How we can remind people that we're nurturing and communal as a species, that it's very important to be nurturing and communal as a species because biologically it's an imperative, and that we need to have that rise of safety as a community to be able to go on, right? The only thing that we have as a predator today is each other, and that's pretty sad. So I want to make sure that it maintains that. So we'll leave it on subscribers only. There's a couple ways you can comment even on subscribers only without subscribing, because I'm not here to get you to pay me money. You can go to the YouTube channel up there. It's open. It's running right now. And so you can go over there and ask questions if you have questions to ask before I turn the comments back on. But I will also turn the comments back on after I get through subjects, just because. So let me go ahead and start first with some of the rules. Well, you know what? Since we don't have comments on, we don't have to worry about that right now. Before I turn comments on, we'll go over the rules of being a safe space. Let's go ahead, though, and get started on who I am and what I'm doing, why I think I get to come in here and talk, right? Everybody gets the right to talk, and we all get the right to say things, but why I think that it's a necessity for me to do it, right? Why it's what I do. I'm Widda. To me, that's more of a title than a name. It has to do with being a scientist, and I study the science of creation. It is an indigenous term. It's a Gaelic indigenous term, and it goes back several thousand years, because indigenous people have science across the globe. Indigenous people have always had science across the globe. Science is a part of being indigenous. It's only when religion stamps out science in people that people become ignorant and lose that for an extended period of time, that we then think that science is some new and fantastical thing that we somehow invented right now, when actually science is something that was invented by Homo erectus. One second, my vacuum cleaner decided to start. And it will drive me to absolute distraction. I'm also distracted by the fact that there are people in my space while I'm talking. So if I get squirrely, I apologize. So science goes back before us. It goes back to Homo erectus. It's an ancient thing. It's really a very fundamental part of who we are, because science is based on curiosity. Science is based on seeing something and being curious about what that something might mean, right? And so it's really a fundamental part of who we are as a species. It's really, God, a really foundational thought process of who we are as a species, right? So that's what I do and who I am. I have this beautiful white armor, but I am not white. I actually am very, very mixed and have connection and ties to Indigenous communities across the globe, and also to other communities who no longer have an Indigenous heritage across the globe, to every corner of the globe. And so I call myself globally mixed Indigenous, right? Because I am Indigenous and because I have family members in every area of the globe, right? And blood ties and heritage and cultural ties to every member, or to every space on the globe, right? And so to me, that's important. I try to utilize this armor to help protect others and to help. Sometimes it's easier for people to think and hear shit from somebody who looks like me, which I'm not exactly comfortable with. And yet it is something I will utilize because of the fact that we have to utilize every weapon in our arsenal to try and end the atrocities around us, right? Especially when we see atrocities around us. I've spent 40 something years studying archaeology, anthropology, history, who we are, why we are. It is the study of my life. And this is after a couple of degrees, one in medicine and one in archaeology, and an inability to work for others because I can't partake in that system. It physically and mentally is not possible for me due to the military and other things. I choose to use my time to come in here and give out information. I don't believe it should be gatekept behind a $40,000 a year paywall, and I don't believe it should be gatekept behind language and words that are hard for most people to understand, right? If the common education is a fifth grade education and you're using $10 words, it makes it hard for anybody to understand anything. And it's even hard for people with extensive degrees and extensive vocabularies. And so I'd rather people have an understanding of what it is and what it means. Education should be free. And knowledge should be free. And that quest for knowledge is a huge part of who we are. And withholding it from us, dumbing us down, is one of the ways that they keep us under control, that they keep us down and they maintain power to hoard, right? So that's why I'm here. What we're going to talk about today is anything on this list behind. I'm going to go ahead and turn it off as subscriber comments for a while because we're down to about 120 people in here. And people have stuck around for a hot minute, which generally means that they're not here to troll, generally. So we'll turn it on for a couple of minutes. My mods are here to make sure and maintain my chat safely. It's important to me that my mods don't just block people outright. So my mods are unlikely to block you outright unless you're just outright racist. I will teach you how race does not exist in this chat. We will talk about how genes really don't have a whole lot to do with all the things that they say they have shit to do with, and very little to do with your skin tone, and how there's more genetic diversity within community than between communities, which makes sense because nobody wants to be inbred, right? And I don't do phobias based on gender and desire. There are 3 biological sexes, male, female, and intersex. And gender is your id. It is your conscious of self. It is who you identify as, and nobody else gets to take away your idea of what your conscious is of who you are. That's extremely problematic for anybody to think they have the right. I also don't do co-chats. This is an educational forum where I'm basically giving a lecture. I open it up for questions, absolutely, because that helps me and interacts, but I rarely have panels. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the subscriber-only comments. Maybe. Sometimes my phone tech does not want a phone tech. Let me see if I can do it this way. And I'll get it to where people can ask questions. I'll probably start with the species around us just because of the fact that the species around us really have the foundation of who we are, right? Really give us that ability to really understand who we are, right? With my mods will block anybody who's absolutely outright racist. If you have questions and they come across wrong, my mods might mute you for a couple of minutes, but you'll be able to talk again after that mute, because questions are extremely important to me. And I understand that we don't always understand how to ask the questions. And sometimes our questions come across wrong in text, right? One thing that I ask is don't tell me I'm lying. If you think I'm wrong, you might be right, but tell me why I'm wrong. Don't just say you're lying. Say, yo, I know this information from this source that states that that's incorrect, so that I know how to find that information, so that I know how to change my mind, so I know how to understand that information. It might be freezing for everybody. I apologize. It's been a little bit weird back and forth lately. It seemed to be going really well yesterday. Let me... Okay, I see. Okay, so let me go ahead and end and restart. Let me try that and see if that will do it, because and I'm hearing over on YouTube that it's freezing over on TikTok too. So let me go ahead and start it again just to make sure. So go ahead. Yeah, be right back. Oh, I know why. Okay. Let's see if that's any better. I'm back up. Let's see if switching it over will make it any less likely to freeze. Or, yeah, I think I phrased that right. Let me know. Let me know if it's still freezing up. If it's not still freezing up, I'll go ahead and continue. If not, I switched it over on the internet thinking maybe that would stop the freezing. Oh, cool beans. Okay, good. Awesome. So I'll wait just a second and just chat for a second as I wait for people to come back in. Because we had like roughly 120 people that were there trying to probably tell me for 20 minutes that it was freezing because I had subscriber only comments on, right? I think that was because I usually have it on my internet in my house, and I'd had it on my phone, and my phone internet doesn't work in the house. And I think that's what it was. And I didn't realize it until after I shut down. I'm pretty sure it was my phone. Technology and I don't get along. I can think of 1,000 different reasons why technology and I are having a hard time interacting. I did grow up backwoods and off grid and didn't have any technology as a child, really. And then, you know, I also grew up in the 70s and the 80s, which was not a time where there was a lot of technology, or a lot of the technology we have today. So like, I can totally see many different reasons that technology and I do not get along. Thank you, Nikki. Absolutely, Katie. And I do think sometimes it's a TikTok issue, but I think it's the phone issue. And that's why, because the YouTube is on my laptop. So the YouTube's going to have a better connection to my internet. And I think that this was on my phone internet, and that's why it was freezing out. I apologize. And I doubly apologize for not having a way for anybody to tell me the fact that it was freezing on them, or at least anybody on TikTok to tell me. I did see something come up, a comment come up about nations, different tribes. as I was leaving, and I thought I had held on to it, but I didn't hold on to it properly enough. So if you're still in here, please let me know, and I'll go ahead and answer that. Well, because, apparently you like 90,000-year-old ago 13-year-olds, because that's what that is. Like, I mean, I know she looks old, doesn't she? That's one of the things that kind of fascinates me and I think is really cool. So they recently found out that up until about 30,000, 20,000 years ago, maybe even further, we used to we wash our skin and our bodies so much now. And we used to wash, right? We've always washed, but we didn't wash like our faces as much. And there would accumulate like this layer of there's like a chemical that we used to secrete more of. And between that chemical and the layer of our skin cells, it would create this sunscreen. And we actually looked older. And that's why this child behind me is 13 years old. And she's from 90,000 years ago, and her name is Denny. And she is the first hybrid that we have from DNA. We can see that her mother was Neanderthal and her father was a Denisovan. And Denny's like the comprehension of what they think Denny looked like, the artistic rendering that I have behind me comes from the extrapolation from her DNA, because the Max Planck Institute just gave out a new ability to extrapolate facial features, skull features, body features from the DNA itself, right? So that they can see things like we've seen for a minute where we can see the alleles for skin and eye and stuff like that. But they figured out how to understand within the DNA the measurements of different body parts within your DNA. And so now they've had a better ability to extrapolate what you might have looked like, right? What your hair shape might have been, because that's what dictates whether or not you have curly hair or straight hair, is the shape of the follicle of your hair, or what the ranges of measurements for your nostrils or for your eyes or stuff like that might be. So that's the, did it freeze totally and completely? Oh, tell me that it, just as long as I didn't get another freaking ban. I swear, I wasn't saying anything. I thought for a moment that it froze on me, which I'm a little bit happier that it froze on me than the problems the last couple of days. So I would invite you to find evidence that is not pseudoscience evidence for the comment about people who have more gold than Fort Knox. I would invite you to find actual evidence, not pseudoscience evidence, and compile that evidence and show people that evidence if you can truly find evidence to see that actually coming true, right? Or actually being real. Actually, that's I think the no eyelashes really comes through as just the way we're seeing it, but I think that she actually has eyelashes. You can kind of see it next to the A on my text, where her bottom lid there, like my eyelashes from a distance don't like lash out as much, right? They're more just this kind of brown line around my eyes, right? So I think it's more like that. And Wi-Fi repeater, that might be. And then most of us have traces of Neanderthal. In fact, they have shown that there's only 2 communities on the planet that don't have Neanderthal DNA. And those are the Yoruba people of West Africa, geographically challenged, I apologize, and the Kwe people of South Africa. And those two communities actually have 3 ghost species in them, but they're the only communities on the planet that don't have traces in Neanderthal. Everybody else on the planet, including the vast majority of people in Africa prior to colonization, have Neanderthal DNA within them. And that's because a lot of the intermixing between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens happens on the Arabian Peninsula. That's where the vast majority of the intermixing happens, and it starts at like 150,000 years ago. And so because of that, it means that the Neanderthal DNA really makes it not only across the planet going out, but it actually makes it back into Africa, as you see that Homo sapiens are going back into Africa, and that Neanderthal is going back into Europe. And so you see that that goes back and forth. And you actually see that in like 250,000 years ago, we actually have no Y DNA from Neanderthals. We have 4 Neanderthals that we've identified as male, and one of them is really, really old, and its Y DNA seems to come from Homo denisovan. The other 3 have sapien Y DNA, and they're all after 250,000 years ago. And the Y DNA within them is the Y DNA from sapien. That's awesome. I'm also related to Otzi. And then I'm also like, if you put your stuff into one of the sites like GetMatch, and I use Your True Ancestry, which really has a whole lot of European stuff as well. And when you do that, you can find like Cheddarman, like myself, Cheddarman, the Viking shield maiden, the warrior queen woman, you know, the great warrior that they thought was this huge general and the biggest warrior that they'd ever found archaeologically, until they decided that it was biologically female, and then they decided they're not exactly sure who she is, right? So like there's like the first voyage to Iceland. There's a lot of different stuff that you can be connected to when you're looking at the archaeological graves and the DNA that they're getting out of the archaeological graves today. It is amazing. For me, like I have two people in Greenland, 2 bodies in Greenland, or 2 ancestors, I think is the best way to put it, in Greenland, like at 8,000, 7,000 years ago. And then I have Kennewick man, who's like 15,000 years old. And then I have 2 ancestors in Brazil that are like 8, I think, 1,000 years ago as well. Like, and I'm like, oh, those are cool. And then I've got just clear across. And then on GEDmatch, it'll actually connect you to specific Neanderthal sites. Like you can be connected to Neanderthal 1, which is like, no, I don't think they can do Neanderthal 1 because I don't think they have the skull anymore. I think they lost that skull. But you can be connected to, I think, Shanidar 1 I've seen on there. And there's a couple of different ones on there. And I love that. Like you can go in and you go, oh, look at that, look at that, look at that, right? So why hasn't any ghost species been labeled or named? So how that has to do with how we name species. So when we named Homo neanderthal, Neander is the tal or valley, because that's what tal is in German, that we found them in. So Neanderthal, so they became Neanderthal. When we found Homo florensis is on the island of Flores in Indonesia, so they're Homo florensis. When we found Homo denisovan is from the Denisova cave in Russia. Homo longi is from the Lone cave in China. Homo naledi is from the Rising Star cave. Naledi means star. So we named them after where we found them. We haven't found their bones in the fossil record or gotten DNA from their bones in the fossil record. We may have found their bones and we just haven't gotten the DNA because we've only gotten DNA out of Neanderthal and Denisovan so far. So we haven't found a DNA link to their bones in the fossil record, so we haven't found a name for them. That's why they're a ghost, right? Because we don't have a full genome of them to connect them to. So until we have a full genome of them to connect them to, we don't have a name for that, right? And so when we look at that, hopefully we'll find names for them in the future, right? And hopefully when we find names for them in the future, it'll give us to find names for them, we're going to find their whole genome, and finding their whole genome is going to give us the ability to take that whole genome and find out who they are and all the different details about them as a species, right? So I think that that's cool. So easy, your caveman can do it. Yeah. I really actually, and there are others who would disagree. I really actually love the caveman commercials, right? The Viking or the Geico commercials where they have the Neanderthals in the suit and tie. To me, that's epic because for me, it's always been an understanding that this consciousness of self and the consciousness of the world around you, the environment, the biome around you, for the human species has been the same since the first human. And the first human would be Homo habilis, right? So anything that has the genus Homo is a human because Homo means human. Actually, I support the humanity took a wrong turn in agriculture. I've actually got a lot of information supporting the rise of violence surrounds the rise of agriculture and the rise of agricultural-based cities. Not agriculture itself, because we've always practiced agriculture, tending the environment. Honorable harvest is agriculture, and these are things that are why we were put here by the environment, why we were created, the niche that we fulfill within the environment. But the monocrop agriculture that rips out the environment and replaces the environment. Absolutely. I've actually got we're actually on YouTube. The Rise of Violence is the tab that is up on YouTube. And that's one of the things we're going to discuss today. And it's actually directly correlated with the rise of agriculture being a monocrop agriculture and associated with cities. One real question: what does this change? True or not? What are you doing to solve it? So what I'm doing to solve it is this. And what does this change? You live in a society today that has convinced you your next door neighbor is the problem instead of the person who's hoarding all the fucking wealth and making sure you starve. That's the society you live in today. And it's convinced you that when you help the homeless, you're contributing to the problem because the homeless are somehow the fucking problem. Instead of the fact that the problem is there is a small number of people who are hoarding all the wealth and all the resources. I call these our narcissistic God kings. This ties back into the rise of violence. It ties back into the rise of monocrop agriculture. And it ties back into the rise of the need to control, right? The need to institute control. Okay. What am I doing to change it? I'm telling you about it. I'm making you understand things that nobody gets a fact of understanding anymore because it's all hidden, right? It's all gate kept, right? I am giving you the compilation of 40 years of study to try and find out what the fuck is wrong, because I've known from the beginning that this is not right. We're not living right. This is not right. This doesn't fit. This doesn't work. This is not right. And I've known for the beginning. And for a while, I thought it was me, right? And now I realize it's not me. It's the fact that this is not how our species thrives. This is how our species is killing itself. This is not how we thrive. This is how we die, right? So what am I doing about it? I'm letting you know. How do I think we fix it? Land back on a global scale. Tending and governance to indigenous cultures on a global scale gives tending and governance to an animistic sense on a global scale. Animism lives in concert with the environment, and it places a huge priority on community. And by living in concert with the environment and placing a huge priority on community, we return to what we were for 290,000 years of life, right? For 290,000 years of life. And we get rid of the violence and the problems and the hoarding and the starving and the destruction of the environment, because cyclic changes happen, right? The world itself changes on a cyclic basis. That happens. Global warming and global cooling. These are cyclic. These are things that happen on a regular cycle of time, right? But what we're doing right now is climate destruction. And there's a huge difference between climate changing and climate destruction. And as long as we are destroying our environment and destroying our climate, which we have been doing for 10,000 years, and I can show you where we did it in Angazal at 10,000 years ago, and we stopped, we had to leave Angazal and abandon Angazal because we had caused a wasteland. We had taken a fertile space to a wasteland in 300 years because monocrop agriculture in cities kill everything from us to the earth. Kill everything from us to the earth. And because it's killing everything from us to the earth, if we can get rid of that concept and go back to the honorable harvest, the tending of environment, and the communal-based thought process that we see in indigenous nations across the globe, then we can end this and stop our species from dying. That's why I'm here. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's why Sarah gets on this thing 5 or 6 times a month and tries to tell you, because the only way I can see out of this, the only way I can stop hurting, the only way I can leave my house, the only way I can feel safe around y'all is if I remind you of who the fuck we really are. If I remind you of who we really are, because we are not this. We do not hurt each other. We do not kill each other. We do not hate our next door neighbor just so somebody can hoard everything while we're starving. That's it. That's all. That's what we do about it. That's why I'm here. That's what I think, true or false. It was a great question. I'm sure it wasn't meant to be, more than sarcasm, but it was a great question. So I love you too. And that's the other reason I'm here, is to remind you that we're all biologically nurturing and communal, and we all deserve love by breathing. Just by breathing, we need love and compassion and empathy to actually thrive as a species. As an individual, we have to. They have failure to thrive studies in the 50s. Babies who don't get love and touch die, right? So we need love and compassion and empathy and touch. We need nurturing. So just by breathing, because it is when you draw your first breath that you become a human being and a Homo sapien and a life all of your own, right? Is when you draw your first breath and stop being a parasite, right? So when you draw your first breath, just by breathing, just by the act of drawing breath, you are worthy of love and compassion and empathy. You are worthy of nurture. You are worthy of food. You are worthy of safety. You are worthy of shelter. These are things that are biologically required so that you can be alive. And just by drawing breath, you are worthy of them. You do not have to be exploitable to somebody hoarding from you. You do not have to be exploitable to somebody hoarding from you to be worthy of love and compassion and shelter and food and safety. Again, when you draw your first breath, you become a life. Before that, you are a parasite. And that's why abortion should always be supported. That's why abortion should always be legal, because I am a life. Something that is a parasite off of me is not yet a life. It will become one. You got to care for it after it's born. And how many of y'all are willing to do that? You just want to see it born. You don't want to see it nurtured or loved or taken care of, right? No, my mugshots have purple hair. And usually they're full of tear gas in my face. And most of them have black glasses on them. That's my mugshot. Some of them have the big red handprint from MMIW, because of the fact that at 26% per capita, we are losing our siblings. Every year, 26% per capita of indigenous women and children go missing. Every year. I've lost 2 sisters in the last 3 years. So some of my mugshots have a big red handprint for awareness for MMIW. Okay? And if you don't care, then you don't need to be here. If you're here, you absolutely care. If you think you're commenting, you obviously care. If you have the need to open your little mouth and close your little ears, you obviously care enough to say something, don't you? MMIW, I apologize, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. You'll sometimes see MMIP or MMIWG with a small g. And it is because at 26% per capita, Indigenous people in the United States and Canada go missing every year. That's over a quarter of an Indigenous population going missing or being murdered every year. So that's my mugshots for educational purposes. Let's go ahead, though, and talk about the other species around us first, and then talk about the ghost species that we see as well within the populations around us, right? I think the uncanny valley, I think, is I don't think that we're afraid. I think that we mistake what we feel, right? With that thought process, right? I think that we look for our faces in everything. We look for our faces in everything. So if we look for our faces in everything, why, when we see something that looks like us, but we don't just dignify it as us, do we feel afraid if we're constantly looking for that, right? We're constantly trying to find it. I think it's more the fact that we had it and we lost it. Not that we got rid of it, not that we killed it off, because there's no evidence of that. In fact, Neanderthal live on today. There's more Neanderthal DNA on the planet today than there ever was during their time as a species whole, because of how small their species was. My mugshots are all from 2020, though. That's why I don't have any other ones out there. No, I didn't get arrested in any other actions that I was in. So, yeah, is it having a problem? Oh, no, it paused again on me. Hold on, let me. It was on my end. I apologize. It does this. This has been the problem we've been having. I think the VPN did help, but I wasn't up for paying $60 for a year's worth of a VPN just because I don't have the cash for that right now. But I don't think, even with the VPN, it was still pausing on me. So I don't think that's what it is either. And I'm literally 7 foot from my Wi-Fi router right now. That's why I go live where I am. I'm literally staring at the light that's on my Wi-Fi router right now. So I don't think that that's what it is. I don't know what it is. It keeps pausing and just keeps pausing and keeps pausing. And so, I have no clue. But hopefully the pause, the fact that it paused here, or the fact that it restarted for me, actually fixed whoever it was that was having a problem. Thank you, Puppet. So let's go ahead and talk about the other species, right? So first, again, I want to define the fact that the word homo is, as a genus, means human. Homo in Greek means same, and we know that one, right? In Latin, it means human, and we name most of our things in Latin. We are Homo sapiens. I say Homo sapien all the time, and I've had people come at me in my videos about how obviously I'm not an archaeologist because I say Homo sapien instead of Homo sapiens. And I'll tell you right now, I'm never going to pronounce anything right. I don't care, unless it's in an indigenous language that is struggling to, stay alive in the face of, genocide and problems. I could not give a. English is a bastardized language made up of 10 different languages, and nobody in the US pronounces or says anything right to start with anyways, and we certainly don't spell any of it right. So I don't care. I would state, though, that it is absolutely Homo sapiens. I just mispronounce it most of the time. So homo means human. It is the genus that anything that falls under as a species is therefore a human. So we see the rise of homo with the rise of Homo habilis. Now, because of shifts in our understanding with evolution in the last year, that might change. Homo habilis may no longer be, because we thought Homo habilis was human because handyman. Habilis means handy, and we thought that Homo habilis was the first creator of stone tools, and that's why we named him handyman, why we thought he's human. We now know that Paranthropus boisei actually creates the first tools, the Oldowan tool complex, though we also know that it is a mixture of Paranthropus boisei, Australopithecus africanus, which you would know of as Lucy, and Homo habilis that creates the first Homo erectus, because Homo erectus comes out of speciation through convergence. Speciation through convergence is something. I'll listen, KP, for about 2 seconds, as long as it's not rude. Speciation through convergence is something that we thought of until the last year as being a theoretical method of speciation. We didn't believe it existed. And in the last year, we realized that Homo erectus speciated through convergence and that we speciated through convergence. And Homo erectus speciating through convergence of those three different species becomes a species that's highly diverse and adaptable. Okay. We do not have any DNA from Homo erectus. We don't have any DNA from any of the other Homo species except for Neanderthal and Denisovan. And because of that, I can't tell you that they're extremely genetically diverse by their DNA, but I can tell you that there is theories of their genetic diversity being why we have several different Homo species that are all living together in the same camps who have completely different morphology. And so there is thought that they were very genetically diverse species, that because they were so genetically diverse, the different children within the species are all very different. And so we call them subspecies of Homo erectus. There's also thought that these are completely different species and that have come out of Homo erectus. And there's also thought that these different species are all the same species, right? And we just shouldn't be calling them like that, right? Actually, we see that nose rings and piercings go back to Neanderthals. So they did, some of them, not Homo erectus, but some of them. Please leave your deity out of my chat. Titi, leave your deity out of my chat. That deity is not a very good deity. He does a lot of evil in this planet, and I don't like him. So please leave him out of my chat. In whatever way that you follow him, you go do it somewhere else. Leave him out of my chat. Thank you very much. This face, we know what it looks like through extrapolation through DNA, which is something that recently came out of the Max Planck Institute, is new testing ability so that they can extrapolate facial features through DNA. I didn't see your question, KP. I actually watched for your question, but I didn't see your question. And if that's what you need to do, Mike, go right ahead. So we see that Homo erectus is speciating out of convergence. And because Homo erectus is speciating out of convergence, and all the different species that we see come out of Homo erectus have so many different morphologies, have so many different ways of moving, have so many different environments that they're speciating in, that we see when they come back together, they're able to speciate us through convergence. Now, the other species that we see from Homo erectus that sometimes we think of as the subspecies, nobody saw your question, KP. Nobody said anything about nice. We did not see the question. It did not come through. If your question did not come through, maybe it is because of the fact that you put a word in there that's blocked, right? So if you put a question through and nobody saw it, it might need to be reworded, right? I think God is not in my chat aloud. Because that's the newest information. The newest information on when Homo sapiens enter the Turtle Island and Abayalian areas are 54,000 years ago is the genetic split. And we have evidence of them being here at 50,000 years ago. My mod did say be nice. They will say to be nice. That's one of my big things within here, is that you talk with kindness in here, because I'm talking with kindness in here. And I don't put up with not talking with kindness, right? So my mods will absolutely tell you to be nice. And so that's why I place Homo sapiens making it to Turtle Island and Abayala so early. Those are all new studies, and all of them are on the Ancient Science page. Western agriculture actually is monocrop agriculture. And what it does is it destroys the entire environment around it. And when it's done destroying the entire environment, it places something in the environment that gets no nutrients, because all the environment nutrients are gone. And it will actually take a space from a fertile garden to a wasteland. And the first time we did it, it took a place from a fertile garden to a wasteland in 300 years. And that's documented in Ain Ghazal along a river in Jordan. And Engazol is still there because it's risen again many, many times. I don't believe we come from Neanderthals. I don't believe in ether either. All the DNA we have is terrestrial. Now, I do believe that all the origin stories that I've heard, all the creation stories that I've heard are absolutely proven to be true in the science. The science shows that we're created from the biome, from the earth itself, from the air, from the wind, from the stars, from the water, from the trees. The science shows that we're created to fulfill a niche within the biome, which means that creating of us to fulfill a niche in the biome is being created from a part of the biome, right? So if we're created from a part of the biome, almost every story that you can think of out there, every story that I have heard out there is creation is from part of a biome. And when you look at migration stories, pretty much every migration stories I've heard of so far is actually provable with the science as well. Right. Many of the migration stories in Turtle Island and Abiyala are migration stories of boats. And within the last 10 years, we've proven that boats are a huge part of the migration story for many nations here in Turtle Island on the scientific level. Right. So all species arrive with the purpose. I would like you to point out, I think there's concept that maybe the duck-billed platypus doesn't have a purpose, right? Though it is still a huge part of its biome, right? All species, from the plants to the animals, all species have a purpose. The only species that don't have a purpose are species that we've created, like dogs, right? Name me a species that doesn't fulfill a niche in the environment, Willa. Just a species that doesn't fulfill a part of the environment. So the genetic mutation is through adaptation, right? We adapt to the environment, right? That's how we mutate, is through adaptation. And those adaptations adapt us to fulfill a space within the environment, to do something within the environment. This is why we have a food chain, right? This is why we see that the chemicals that are released from plants are chemicals that we need, right? I didn't say anything about evolving within an environment natively being the only way you fulfill a niche. I stated that things are evolved to fulfill a niche in the environment. That we are all evolved by adapting to the environment. And we adapt not only to, so your adaptations are adaptations for the need of the environment. If the environment is high in oxygen, you adapt with the ability to process higher amounts of oxygen. If the environment is lower in oxygen, you adapt with the ability to process lower amounts of oxygen. Those adaptations are fulfilling a space within the environment, right? The environment doesn't have enough oxygen to give you, so you adapt needing less of it, so you fulfill the need of the environment, right? That is evolution. That's exactly what I'm stating. That's exactly what I'm saying, right? That's evolution. That's how we evolve, adaptation, right? So thank you. When we are looking at the way, but it is about what benefits the environment. It is about what benefits the environment. It would not benefit the environment to have a need of high oxygen, because you'd be sucking up all the oxygen, and other things within the environment would therefore have. The organism is part of the environment. You're arguing semantics with me. Thank you very much. You're arguing semantics with me, and I'm not going to argue semantics. Thank you very much. Okay. So because we are adapting to fulfill a niche within the environment, and because the first humans, Let me see if I can explain this to you in a way that you can grasp it. If I initially adapt to fulfill the needs of the environment, right? And that's how I become a species in the environment, whatever it is. Say it's a worm, right? But the environment in my adaptation, after I adapt to the environment, something else causes a change in the environment. That might cause a mutation within me, right? And that mutation, right, causes me to shift and something becomes toxic. Either a part of the environment or a part of me becomes toxic. That does not change the fact that my initial adaptation is to fulfill a niche. What it means is that this mutation is toxic to my initial purpose. Okay, so yes, genetic drift, permanent genetic, all of those things are adapting to those specific spaces, though. Literally, everything is down to adaptation. Animals have a purpose. Everything has a purpose. Trees release oxygen so you can breathe oxygen. Do you not see that as a purpose? By the environment they were. How do you think the trees, so speciation happens because you're adapting to an environment, right? Can we agree on that? That speciation, whether it's through genetic drift, whether it's through isolation, whether it's through convergence, it's because you have to change to fit the environment you're in. Adaptations take generations. It's not just your lifetime. Just with that. I am a war vet user, blah, 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 blah. I'm also a two-spirit war vet. I also have ancestors in every corner of the globe of every color and race. Race being debunked. Okay. So you can take that one and shove it right up. As a war vet, I don't need a month. Thank you very much. What I need is for my other war vet siblings to not be homeless, but I certainly don't need a whole month of recognition. And I absolutely need a month of recognition for marginalized people. As a war vet, I absolutely need a month of recognition for marginalized groups. And I absolutely, man, I don't know a war vet that would be comfortable with a month of recognition. We can barely handle a day most of the time. So take that somewhere else. So, Willa, I think you're misunderstanding evolution. Evolution comes because we're adapting. Let's go ahead and look up. Okay, I see what you're saying. You think that I think that there's a God that is the purpose. What I'm saying is the biome, the earth, is the purpose. I'm saying you and the tree are the purpose. You think that I'm trying to make it creation as in creationalism. I am not on any level. But I'm saying that we all fit into a niche. We all fulfill a niche in the biome. So a system, did it do it again? It did it again. Hold on. So what I'm saying is that a system, a biome, an organism, any organism that you have, right? Every part of your body is an organism, right? Every part of your body has a purpose within your body. Your gut has a purpose within your body. It fulfills a certain need of the organism, right? I'm saying that the earth is an organism and that the organs within the organism fulfill a specific niche within the organ. Okay? Within the organism. Okay? That's what I am stating. In no way, shape, or form am I taking this to any form of a higher power. My higher power is energy. Okay? I think it's all just energy. It's all just atoms. Okay? In no way, shape, or form am I taking this to a higher power. What I am stating is that everybody's creation stories that have a thought process of a higher power can be scientifically proven as evolution, right? If I believe in my creation story that I came from the dirt, coming from the biome and the way that the biome adapts a species to fit into the biome, the species adapts to the biome. Those adaptations are what create a species. So if I believe that I come from the earth and I show that the biome being the earth, the organism being the earth creates the species, then this shows that the creation story of being created from the earth is here in the science. I'm not saying that that proves God exists, because I don't believe he does. I'm stating that every creation story, which is what I was going to state next, is every creation story, right, is a scientific explanation by an ancient people. Our creation stories and our migration stories are the proof of science within indigenous communities. Well, not the only proof, but a proof of science in indigenous communities across the globe, because we can see that the creation stories that were created to explain the science of evolution are actually shown in actual evolution. And that's what I'm trying to state. I am in no way on any level stating that there is a deity. So if that's what you were thinking that I was stating, I was not trying to. I can see where I said created from the biome might have given that thought process as in a creation, as in a God, right? I do not believe that there is a deity out there. I, in fact, believe that all deities are archetypes of ourselves, right? All created deities are archetypes of ourselves. I think the Bad Durenberg shaman is a perfect example of created deities being an archetype of self, right? I absolutely believe that. And I absolutely believe that every creation story that we know of across the globe can be shown as evolution when you compare it to the science. Does your creation story state that you were created from the stars? Many creation stories do. When you look at the fact that what creates the very first life on the planet is a combination of all the different atoms and elements that happened within the Big Bang thought process, if you follow the Big Bang theory, or if you look at how the first singular celled creature was created and comes up, and it takes all of these different elements coming in to create that. This is absolutely a great way of showing that we are created from the stars, and an explanation for people who that's the explanation formed for, correct? And that's what I'm stating, right? Because it's important for many groups across the globe for their indigenous creation stories and their indigenous migration stories to be recognized as the scientific and historical proof that they are. We discount indigenous voices across the globe on a massive scale, and by doing so, we have lost a lot. Permaculture is an exquisite example of that. Permaculture is honorable harvest. That's what permaculture is. It is indigenous tending and honorable harvest, right? And because permaculture is an indigenous tending honorable harvest method that has been taken and twisted and appropriated and doesn't have the full concept of it because it has been taken, permaculture is a really great example of how indigenous knowledge was thrown to the side and has been gathered back up half-heartedly without all the understanding. We need to listen to indigenous peoples about their science, right? We need to listen to indigenous people about the science that they've had, as I had started the conversation, since Homo erectus, because science goes back to Homo erectus. Science predates our species, and it is a huge part of who we are and why we are, right? And so when I am stating that all the creation stories and all the migration stories around the globe can be proven in the modern science, that the traditional indigenous centuries, hundreds and millennia old science across the globe has been confirmed by modern science, can be confirmed by modern science. What I'm saying is not that there is a creator, not that there is a God, not that there is a deity, but that the biome itself, the organism itself, is the creator. The organism of the earth creates the human species, the trees, the plants, the water. The organism of the earth creates it. That's what I was saying. We are absolutely all have indigenous ancestors. All of us have been through colonization. All of us. For some people, that colonization is still going on for 1,000, 2,000 years in the space that they're in. They're indigenous nations across the globe. For some people, they faced the first documented colonization, and they're still facing the first documented colonization. We know them as the Canaanites and the Hebrews, right? The Hebrews documented how they colonized the Canaanites and the brutality of their colonization of the Canaanites, and we're watching the 4,000-year story play out there. And that's the first documentations that we really see of colonization. For some of us, we see that colonization has gone back even further than that, right? Many places that it's gone back further than that, we don't see a whole lot of it, really playing out. But it really does start around 10,000 years ago when we start to see this concept that property is ownable, that the land is ownable instead of being a part of. I am indigenous, to Turtle Island included. I'm globally mixed. I have everything in me. My direct maternal line cuts off with a slave woman named Lucy who escaped pregnant with her daughter in her belly, who was my grandmother, Flindra, and her son on her hip. My grandfather's line is where the indigenous of Turtle Island comes in. But I have indigenous connections across the globe. So when I say we face colonization, yes, I am also aware that a good portion of this colonized as well, right? Like that grandmother who escaped pregnant, escaped with her master's child in her belly. And so the grandmother Flindra was part Black and part Dutch, right? So like I'm well aware that like a half of this, 23% roughly of this assaulted the other 70 something percent of this. And I'm well aware of that, But yeah, we are all colonized, and we are all colonized. Sorry, I apologize. I thought that that's what you were saying because that's how it looked in text. And as I stated, sometimes it's hard to tell in text. When we are looking, we have all gone through colonization. We have all gone through colonization. And some of those colonizations are way earlier than other of those colonizations. I'd say 6,000 is a good element. I would say actually I can trace it back 10,000 years. I think that with the rise of violence, we see the rise of colonization. We see some of our first villages or cities. There's one, and I can't remember where off the top of my head. It was reading about it when I was reading about the rise of violence. So it might actually be in that article, but it's talking about a city where the inner portion, the inner graveyards are all really nice graveyards. And the outer portion is just basically a mass grave with people's heads stove in. And so you can see this is the prior owners of that village and then the replacing owners of that village, right? And colonization does predate recorded history. That's why I'm saying the first recorded history of what we have is the Hebrews recording their colonization of Canaan, which is an ongoing colonization, right? So when we are looking at it, colonization absolutely predates it. I'm just saying, or I see that the first, and I do believe it is in the article, which is absolutely up on here right now. So let me actually pull that up. If you're following along on YouTube, we're actually looking at the rise of violence on YouTube right now. And I do believe, let me see. Excuse me. I do believe that it is in this article, and I want to see if I can find it really quick, where it's talking about, you can absolutely see where the people who were colonized were all basically genocided. It's only a city, so I mean, it's a small farming community, a smaller community, so it's not like it's a genocide of an entire group of people. It's a taking out of an entire community, right? Only does not sound right in any of that. It's just the difference between taking out an entire people, which is what genocide is. So it would be like a massacre of a city, I guess is the best way to put it. We do see that starting, and I think that one was like 9,000 years old, if I remember correctly, but I can't remember, and I can't find it as I'm looking down. Intergroup mass violence there. We might find it in this. Because it was really actually interesting. And the date was after 10,000 years. Like it was, because this talks about the rise starting between 12 and 10,000 years ago, and then going from there. No, I can't find it. It must be in the other one, or I must just not be seeing it as I'm scrolling. There are articles on this on the on my website, though, on the one where I compile my bibliographies. The link for that is in my profile, right? So when we are looking, I'm sorry you believe that way. I don't know who you are. So I don't think that you have, like, I mean, why take what you say? I don't even know who you are, right? I was told to come here. I'm doing what elders and educators and culture keepers have asked. So if you have a problem with it and I don't know you, I don't know what to tell you, right? You can go ahead and feel that way, right? And I apologize. Maybe you're not hearing, maybe you're hearing something that I'm not, and that's fair, right? But I can't control it. But I don't know who you are, and I'm not going to change my thought processes based on somebody I don't know, right? Especially not somebody just off of TikTok, right? That is just telling me I'm wrong. And then when I tried to tell them differently, told me that they weren't talking to me, and then told me that they were talking to me. Like, I just don't even know with that. So, hey, like, and I'm not getting anything out of this. Like, not even getting clout out of this. Like, I'm not. I'm just trying, right? So have a great one with it. I can't help you any more than that, though, right? And I'm not here to help those that don't want help. I'm just trying to educate, just trying to give information, and you can take it elsewhere. When we see, since this really seems to be the topic that just comes back around, and so we'll just go ahead and stay on it. When we see that rise of violence coming, let's go into a couple of things with it, right? When we are looking at, and I don't know what they're talking about, right? Like, I'm only seeing half of it anyways. And I tried to respond in a positive and good way, and it was told that it wasn't directed towards me, and then got that used against me. So I don't even know. When we see this rise of violence, what we see at the same time is that we see this rise of Western-based agriculture, which is monocrop agriculture. Now, we see the rise of monocrop agriculture first starting along the Nile. Most of the things in us has started along the Nile. The Nile is probably the true cradle of humanity, right? It's probably our true birthplace for just about everything, right? It has been a beautiful, fertile space for millennia upon millennia, right? And Homo habilis lives along it. Australopithecus africanus or Lucy lives upon it. So many. Oh, what I was stating was that permaculture is an appropriation of indigenous culture because they didn't listen to indigenous people. That's literally what I was saying. I wasn't promoting, well, no, I guess I was. I'm promoting land back 100% in returning tending and governance to indigenous groups across the globe, right? That's 100% I did say land back. So I am absolutely promoting indigenous lifeways as being returned to the tending and governance of our entire globe. I am not on any level stating that Western-based science should be stealing permaculture as permaculture, which is just an appropriation of indigenous lifeways. And I stated specifically that permaculture is an appropriation of indigenous lifeways, that permaculture is an appropriation of honorable harvest, that because they didn't listen to indigenous people is actually a twist of honorable harvest, because I was also stating that land back on a global scale of returning tending and governance on a global scale is the way to end the problem, because somebody asked me, how do we fix it? And how do we fix it? Land back on a global scale. That makes sense. And that makes sense. I just want to make sure that when I hear that one person's misunderstood, I want to make sure that everybody's understood, right? I don't want, because I understand that sometimes the way I'm saying things might not register, or especially because if I get squirreled, right? If I'm off here and there's several different things, it might not register, right? And so if I've made a mistake in allowing somebody to understand, like if my explanation has not allowed one person to understand, it might not have allowed other people to understand. So I want to double down on that when I realize that somebody's misunderstood. Yes. So there's 7. I love this one. We have 7 ghost species. And I have been asked, how do we find a name for them? I really need my phone to quit being a bitch. Really need my phone to quit being a bitch. With the ghost species, we won't have a name for the ghost species until we actually know what species they are, until we have a whole genome and we can find where they are, right? Because it is finding where they are that gives us a name. So with the ghost species, the 7 that we see and where we see them across the planet really gives us a lot of information. When we look at it, we see that we have 3 that we see in the Yoruba people and in the Kwe people in Africa. So the Yoruba community in West Africa and the Kwe people in South Africa. One of the articles that I have up about ghost species calls the Yoruba people the Oyo people. I just want you to know that they are the same people. It's just the most correct term is Yoruba. And you will hear the Kwe being referred to Khion. They don't prefer that term. They would prefer San or Kwe for their correct terminology for them. And so you'll also see them mentioned with that terminology. Just so you're aware when you're reading, well, she said these people, and that's not the 2 people in the article. Well, that's true, because I didn't use the right words for the people in the article that the people would prefer to be used for them. So Those are 3 ghost species between the 2 of them, and those are the only 2 communities on the entire planet that do not have Neanderthal DNA. The rest of Africa, most of Europe has 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. And you see something like 1 to 3% in indigenous Turtle Islanders and Avialians, and I believe, and you see the most in Asia. You see up to 5% in most people within Asia, and you can see, I think it's like 3 to 4% in Australia and the islands of the South Pacific, but I'm not exactly positive on the percentage Neanderthal there. I just know it's a little bit higher and a little bit higher than some others and a little bit lower than some others. So I'm not exactly sure what the percentage is. But the Yoruba people and the Kwe people are the only 2 people that are only 2 communities that do not have Neanderthal within them, and they have 3 ghost species. Again, we don't have names for them yet. And then we see that there is a ghost species that we see within Neanderthal and Denisovans, and we only see it within them. We don't see it within us. We see that there's a ghost species in indigenous Australians, and this really actually ties into a find in Australia that's 120,000 years old called the Moy Hill site. Pangea breaks up at 275 million years ago, and we don't, like, the first upright apes come at 7 million years ago. So Pangea is, we're in the spaces that we're in now, with the exception of maybe like sea level rises and falls, and then islands of the South Pacific. We're and like there's a continent in the South Pacific that's kind of disappeared, right? That they recently, I want to say, okay, so everybody knew it was there and everybody told the Westerners it was there, but the Westerners decided it wasn't there, but they found the island. That's what's left of the continent. So it's recently, yeah, I don't even understand how I can terminology that absolutely correctly. But at this point, like, I mean, I don't want to say discovered, because how do you discover that shit, right? Listened to, understood, heard. That would be the best way to put it. So with the exception of those islands and like continents and stuff like that, the South Pacific being a volcanic hotbed, pretty much everything is where it was from the time that the first upright apes are walking around, right? And that's 7 million years ago. And we see some in like an island in Greece, because all of that area there was savanna. The Mediterranean was savanna at that point in time. And we see footprints there at 7 million years ago. And then we see Sahelanthropithecus tadici in a lake bed in Chad at 7 million years ago. And these are our first upright walking evidences. So that's like 160 or 268 million years between the final breakup of Pangea and the first upright walkers. Everything's roughly where it is now. The way that we see now, we've actually like, it is, and it's set. I've got more on the gold box. So I reset it a little bit ago. The last time you told me I reset it, and it just hasn't gotten up there yet. So because it is going back and forth between this. See, this is why it's hard for me. Last time somebody told me to reset the goal box, and I was trying to reset the goal box as I was trying to run through the comments and answer the questions as I'm trying to reset the goal box, and it was not fucking working, and I lost track of everything. So when we are looking at how people get to Australia that long ago, Homo florensis actually shows us people crossing water, because the island of Flores in Indonesia is in the middle of the Wallace Trench, and the Wallace Trench is in between 2 continental shelves. It's never been anything within the Wallace Trench has never been above sea level. So the island of Flores in Indonesia shows water crossing. We see boats about 500,000 years ago in Neanderthal. No, I apologize. Sorry. We see evidence that Neanderthal makes it to an island within the Mediterranean at 500,000 years ago. We see a wooden a building from Homo heidelbergensis at 500,000 years ago as well. Sorry, those two are conflated or got conflated in my mind for that. When we are looking at the ability to cross water, the ability to cross water seems to go as far back as Homo erectus. Not only the island of Flores in Indonesia having Homo florensis, but the island of Luzon in the Philippines has Homo luzonensis. And these are 2 evidences of Homo erectus crossing water, because Luzon is below the Wallace Trench as well. So the Moy Hill site in Australia is 120,000 years ago. And this would be most likely a descendant species of Homo erectus who had made it there and had been living there for a while and had speciated into a new species. And that's the ghost species within indigenous Australians, most likely. We have a ghost species in Turtle Island indigenous people and an Abiyalian indigenous people. And the ghost species that we see in Turtle Island indigenous people and Abiyalian indigenous people is very likely connected to the Cerruti Mastodon site, the Calico Hill site, and the Heot Local site. So the Heot Local site is 250,000 years ago at its middle ground estimation. The Calico Hill site was dated by Leakey, who founded the Leakey Foundation, one of the most famous anthropologists and archaeologists of all time, was dated by him at 200,000 years. And the Cerruti Mastodon site, many people might have heard of recently, is 130,000 years old. All of these sites show occupation before Homo sapiens is really making it out of the Levant area, out of the Arabian Peninsula area. So we know that these aren't Homo sapiens. In fact, we know that Homo sapien, well, we see the very first of us starting at 300,000 years ago. Current evidence shows that we didn't converge and become a singular species until 135 to 125,000 years ago, which would be after all of the sites here in Turtle Island and Abiyala. And so there is a ghost species in Turtle Island indigenous people and Abiyalian indigenous people, and that would correlate with these sites. This would show Homo erectus making it to this space and Homo erectus speciating. The next part is just my concept, being who I am and my background and my history. I think this is the giants that we hear about in many of our stories. I think that there's evidence of giants that we see, and I think that it would make absolute sense because because of what we call island giganticism and island dwarfism. Homo florensis shrunk. Homo florensis shrunk because island dwarfism says that if you're in a small space with no predators or few predators and not a lot of nutrients, you shrink to fit the space. And if you're in a large space with a lot of predators that are large and a lot of nutrients, you grow to fit the space. So Florensis shrunk. They also have pygmy elephants in Flores, and Luzonensis shrunk. Florensis was 3'5" at its height, and it had large feet. There are hobbit species, right? I truly believe Lord of the Rings in the Middle Earth, right, actually happened. Homo luzonensis is about 4'8" at their height. They're a dwarf species. I don't think that they have large feet, though. I haven't seen anything on that. So we do know that island dwarfism actually absolutely works in the Homo species. So it makes absolute sense that island giganticism would also work in the Homo species. And when we look at North America, we see a large space with a large amount of predators that are extremely large because we get most of our mammoth species, most of our gigantic species within the within the Western Hemisphere, right? And so we have a lot of gigantic nutrients and a lot of gigantic predators, and so that would make sense that we would giganticus, right? So I think our ghost species is Homo giganticus. That's just me. That's not something I have any evidence for. That's just my concept of thought process. Cerruti Mastodon, Calico Hill, and Heot Local are absolute evidence of a species being here, and the ghost species within Homo sapiens in Turtle Island and Abiyala absolutely gives evidence of those three sites being a species that was enveloped within indigenous people when they arrived to the Western Hemisphere. It is. That's how they got the pygmy elephants. So Homo florensis actually had pygmy elephants. They found pygmy elephant bones in the cave with Homo florensis, right? And you see that llamas are actually the start of of all camelids start in South America. And it's when they get to the desert and they get to broader open spaces that they actually become larger, right? And that's the other thing, Ozzy, is so many of our nations speak of giants. That's why this to me rings, because my histories, my stories that I've heard growing up, what I knew growing up, what it was taught to me, I'm like, I bet that's who that is. I bet that's just another way that we're proven correct. Like, this is just another way that Western science is confirming indigenous knowledge, right? So that's my thought process. It was full-grown elephants. Really look up island giganticism and island dwarfism. It is a real thing, right? And it's really how we get the smaller species, a lot of things in the larger species. It's really how they describe mammoths, how mammoths happen, right? Because mammoths became gigantic because of the space that they were in at the time, right? And so it really you know, it's one of the ways that evolution works. It's one of the ways that adaptation drives evolution. The need to adapt to a space drives evolution. Yeah, yeah, that belief. I think I've seen that. Yes, and the red hair giants. That's a huge one. That's a huge one, right? That's I've known. Like I remember that one. Well, and it's I remember the stories of coming on boats for like those are some of the first stories that I remember. I was honored and like I went to I heard indigenous elders speak and teach before I ever went to a mainstream school, and that's a huge honor that I was able to have. And because of that, like those were the stories of creation and migration that were in my mind before any other stories. And so I remember hearing of the boats and coming here on boats really, really, really early on in my life. And so when Homo denisovan DNA with Interland Indigenous people and Abiyali Indigenous people, which is at 0.02 to 0.03%, started showing that there was a southern boat route migration pattern, and anthropologists and archaeologists in the mainstream started really looking into this. I went, ha 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 ha, like they told you. We've been saying, like, you know, and so this is another one of those spaces where you really see Western science confirming indigenous science, right? And I like to make sure that we understand that this is not a Western science is discovering this new shit. Western science is confirming indigenous science. Indigenous science has known. It didn't need the confirmation. Western science needed to confirm. Western science needed that, right? I'm pretty sure that the multiple rainbow hair, because it does look a little bit pink in the front, but the multiple rainbow hair and the nose ring, you know, again, we see piercing go back. Our oldest piercing implements are 35,000 years ago in a cave in France. And these are single points on what were mistaken as cast-off flakes. So when you're flint napping, you get a bunch of really tiny flakes from the way that you nap, right? It gives these cast-off flakes. And so they originally cast-off flakes, and then they found that some of them actually had tiny little points, single points in them. And on those tiny single points, they would find blood and they would find pigment. So we have 35,000-year-old tattooing tools from a cave in France. Tattooing is one of our sure, user, you're a bot online, but you know everything. When we see those points, it shows tattooing going back that far. Now, we have evidence with the Neanderthals of like there's a shell where they mixed ochre to paint, right? And evidence of using ochre to paint on clothing and to paint on your body, right? Of course, we don't have the body anymore, right? But you can find ochre pigments in graves in ways that it would have been on the body when the body was buried, things like that. They also have found piercing evidence in Neanderthal graves, like, you know, a needle across the face where, you know, it after you die and you degrade and your body is gone, like it's laying across the skull, it's there within concert with the skull, right? Things like those really tell us across the planet that piercing is ancient, and decoration of ourselves is ancient. I really think that this has to do with our concept of id, our concept of self, right? So we grew up and were created and came about in convergence. We really come about in this, like the newest evidence shows that we don't have one species or even two species that's our parent species that we came from. We have several species that are our parent species. And what it is you might see a Heidelbergensis and an an Australopithecus ancestor, a Heidelbergensis and an ancestor coming together and making a baby. So that half Heidelbergensis and half ancestor baby might then have a baby with a Homo erectus. And that half ancestor, or that quarter ancestor, quarter Heidelbergensis, half ancestor, or half erectus baby might then turn around and have another baby with a Heidelbergensis. And after generations of doing this convergence, you start getting a couple of children that start having the flat face and the chin that we have. And this is where you really start to see the basal or only in us features starting to come out. And we see that started like 300,000 years ago. The oldest find that we have currently in Africa is Jebel Irud, right? And so we also have one in Ethiopia at 260,000 years ago. And then we have one in, I want to say South Africa, but I can't double remember. Like that's it at 260,000 years ago. I want to say we have two, one in Ethiopia and one in South Africa at that time frame. And so when we see us coming together out of convergence, initially we're just like, we don't see the different features as weird and unusual. This idea that you look different than me and so therefore there's something wrong with you and you're different from me is so new. And it really goes down to the history of the rise of violence and how we see violence rise and how we see that need to control us, how we see that need for the narcissistic God kings to maintain their power so that they can hoard, right? So I make you hate things that look like you. Don't look enough like you, right? I make you think that you can own other things. I make you think that you can own people. I make you think that other people are the problem and not me, right? And before that, we see that everybody around you looks different than you. Every other person is considered a different species by people today. And we froze again. I'll be right back. Coming in. Thank you, Katie. That makes me happy. I appreciate that. Okay. So we see that as we're coming to be as a species, everybody in our family looks different than us. Neanderthals are the first people that don't look like anybody else that we come across, most likely, maybe, right? Maybe not, right? We do see that Neanderthal has evidence of art before we do. We do see that Neanderthal has evidence of burial before we do. And so I truly believe that it is when Neanderthal and Sapiens come together that we start to get burial and art and we start to develop a sense of self, right? Conscious is about self. Like the sense of the id is about who I am, right? Who am I, right? I'm conscious of me, right? And so that sense of being conscious of me as a singular as opposed to the whole, right? Conscious of me as a singular as opposed to the whole. And not like I'm an individual, right? But a part of the whole rather than just the whole, right? I have my own thought processes that are a part of the whole, right? And so when we start to develop that concept that I am an individual, I bring individual talents to the table. I do things. What you believe matters to know. I don't understand that sentence very well, Steve. Could you repeat that sentence in a more understandable way? When we see this consciousness of self, we start to see this decoration of self. When I become conscious of my talents that I bring to the table, when I become conscious of the things that make me me, I start to show everybody what it is that make me me. And a lot of this has to do with I become conscious of art and start to art. Now I want to display my art. I become conscious that I'm a really good flint knapper, so I start wearing flint. I become conscious that I'm a really good sewer, so I wear the best sewn clothes. Conscious of different color patterns and use those, right? And so, yes, belief is not proof. What you prove is science. All of this is scientifically, like I have the evidence to back up the science. It's all on the website that's in my bio. I have bibliographies listed there that go over everything, right? That makes sense. Thank you, Wade. That makes sense. We talk in here about how Homo erectus discovers fire and how they create the ability to harness fire, to use fire, and about the fact that one of the things that they create in the ability to use fire is the ability to make spears that work better, right? before they start using points on their spears, because we don't see that Homo erectus is really using points for spear points, right? We see the Acheulean hand axe, but we don't really see points. So before they're using points on their spears, right? And before, whether learning how to make sure that they are hard, you can make a spear hard by tempering it. You can set it next to the fire and let it heat up. And once it gets hot, you roll it away, cool it down as quick as you can, set it next to the fire again, heat it up. When it gets hot, you roll it away. The tempering of it over and over and over makes it stronger, right? Yes, metallurgy is something that is totally us, but metallurgy, again, comes from the ability to have fire, which comes from Homo erectus. So it's not, we are the only species that's had it, but the tools that we needed to get to it come from other species, right? That's why I say it's Homo erectus's use of science that gives you your telephone. Homo erectus's ability to control fire is a use of science, and their ability to control fire gives you everything you have. It gives you your brain. I'll tell you that Homo erectus we were created by science. Homo erectus is science because of the fact that their ability to control fire gave them more caloric intake per small ounce of food, which means that all that extra caloric intake went to brain growth and development in their neonates and in their womb and in their neonates all the way up into the end of brain growth and development, which means that they got smarter, which means that they got bigger brains, which means that their brains became rounder, which means that we were created by Homo erectus's use of science. You were scientifically created, right? Like there's so much interwoven beauty within it, right? But yeah, and metallurgy, all of those things absolutely come from that ancient science. We are the first species to have it, right? All human species adopt their adaptations. That's part of what it is to be human, right? We see with with all animals on the planet that everybody will adapt their surroundings to them. You'll see a fox will build a den and beaver will build a dam. You'll see that primates and corvids will use tools. You'll see that empathy is in vast majorities of animals. In fact, I would say we're one of the few things that can turn it off. And that there's like this, ability within so many other plants and so many other animals. We all, in some way, shape, or form, adapt the environment. And that's part of why we're in that environment, is to adapt that environment, right? To tend to have a part of that whole organism, right? So when we're looking at that, we are the only species that I have found so far that adapts its adaptations. The beaver builds the same dam for millennia. We took and built that dam and then built an apartment complex, which beavers have. And then decided, well, let's take this sideways and make it out of concrete. Well, let's build it across this way instead. Well, let's use mud instead of sticks, right? We adapt the adaptations, right? And so when we're looking at that, it's really one of the foundational things about us. Is one of the reasons I also say that we're scientific as a foundation, right? Scientific as a foundation because we are constantly curious and constantly trying to take what we observe in nature and change it, right? One of my things is, don't just tell me I'm lying. Tell me what I'm lying about. What is not true? Oh, when you come back in 5 minutes, tell me what's not true. And tell me why, because then I know more. I always like knowing more. Sure, we can go over that. Is adaptation. All skin tone is an adaptation. And it absolutely changes every generation. If you are lighter skin and you are pregnant in an area where you have sun constantly beating down on you, your infant is going to come out with alleles that arrange in a manner to make their skin a couple of shades darker than yours to protect them from the sun a little bit more. It's really all about the sun, but it's not about evolving. It's an adaptation that we got from Homo erectus that gives us the ability to move into different areas. It's actually the last adaptation that we use. We adapt our eyes first. There's melanin in your eyes, and the concentration of melanin in your eyes decides whether you have beautiful dark chocolate eyes or light gray eyes like me, right? So light gray eyes like this, they might be blue today. I think they might be, no, they might be green today because they're gray, so they change. So when you have light eyes like this, when you go into a space with heavy sun, it hurts. You get headaches, right? These are low light adaptation. They're so that you can see better in like forests, so that when you're out in forests, you can see predators easier, which is why we know like Chattermen have blue eyes and the alleles for sub-Saharan dark skin because of the way his alleles configured. And that's 10,000 years ago on the island of Britain, right? Now his direct descendant, 300 generations down, has the same bright blue eyes and very, very light skin. The eyes were an adaptation that came across first because they were a necessary adaptation. First, where the skin, we can get vitamin D from other sources, right? Nobody involved to be the most violent. Violence is really 100% about, there's a group of people who are trying to hoard and take everything. Starts about 10,000 years ago. And in their need to hoard and take everything, they need to convince you to give it to them. They need you to be exploitable. They need to convince you to give them all of this shit so that they don't have to do everything while you're working your fingers to the bone, right? And so how they do that is convincing you to be afraid of your neighbor, to be afraid of the next city, to be afraid of the other person. And if they can convince you to be afraid of anybody but them, then they can control you. So violence is about people in control trying to maintain control through violence. They do this through what we call a process of othering. Okay, this is the correct term. It's been known as other things. I don't want to say the word itself, but it starts with an O and it refers to the continent of Asia. And we used it as that ism for a long time. And really it's othering. It's anything to give you the idea that it's your next door neighbor that wants to take your gold instead of me. It's your next door neighbor who wants your food, not me. It's your next door neighbor that they want to steal your cookie, right? No, it has nothing to do with skin tone. So race doesn't exist. Race is a colonial construct made to create the ability to other. It was really, race itself was just a last level of othering, but it was really created to justify European atrocity because the Europeans had been committing this horrific atrocity based on their Bible. And when their Bible was no longer the fact, they needed another reason to justify the atrocities that they had been committing. So they created the theory of race. And in the creation of the theory of race, it stated that the color of your skin or the texture of your hair had more to do with your genetics than anything else, right? When we look at things that aren't pseudoscience, because all of that's been proven as pseudoscience, like phrenology is pseudoscience. When we look at things that aren't pseudoscience and we do, mammoth and mastodon are the same thing. A mammoth and a mastodon are the same thing. When we look at the current science, like when you look at DNA and you look at the Whole Genome Project, which was done by people across the globe, and the Whole Genome Project proved that there's more genetic diversity within primary populations than there are between primary populations, meaning that if you're a member of the Kwa population of South Africa, you have all of the genes of any gene in the human genome is found in the Kwa population of South Africa. This is because the Kwa population is considered to be the current founding population, right? And so you see every genetic known to Homo sapiens in the Kwa population of South Africa. If you are in Sweden, and you have been in Sweden for 7,000 years, whether you're a Sami who's been there for 7,000 years, or Lower Swedish who's been there for 7,000 years, your genetics with your next door neighbor are going to be more different than your genetics from somebody in South Africa. Now, this makes sense when we look at the idea of inbreeding. You want to make sure that there's broad genetic diversity within a population, because if there's not broad genetic diversity within a population becomes inbred, right? We see this in like founders. We see this in like groups in the United States who came here from other spaces and became insular, and they stayed in their space, and they're becoming more and more inbred. So you see in groups that do not have a lot of genetic diversity that there's a lot of inbreeding. It's not that they're technically inbreeding, like you're not marrying your brother or your sister, but the lack of genetic diversity means that those genes are meeting, and when they meet, they mutate, right? When you have two genes meet in the wrong way, they mutate, right? So we see that you're going to, and I explain this in small numbers because it's easier for me. If the entirety of the human genome is 100 genes, and every human gets 25 genes, and I am in Brazil, and I've been in Brazil for 8,000 years, and I've got somebody next door that's been there for 50,000 years, and we are more genetically diverse from each other than either one of us is from somebody in a different population across the globe. If I have genes 1 through 25 and my next door neighbors had genes 75 through 100, somebody in Sweden who's been there for 8,000 years is going to also have genes 1 through 25. And somebody in China is going to have genes 75 through 100. There is more genetic diversity within primary populations than between populations. Race does not exist. It is a colonial construct. Ethnicity exists and culture exists. And these are very important factors in everybody's lives. Ethnicity and culture are very important factors in everybody's lives. And they exist 100% because they're not about the genes. They're about family lines. They're about understanding of space, and they're about understanding of each other, right? We do see that many of the things that we think have to do with race within the United States, like diabetes being very prevalent in Turtle Island Indigenous people, is only very prevalent in Turtle Island Indigenous people because for generations, Turtle Island Indigenous people have been isolated and confined to reservations, which are literally just concentration camps. And they've been fed very poor food. For a long time, it was rancid flour or rancid lard and weevily flour and rotting meat. And then they started doing experiments for nutrition on children in schools when they stole them from their homes and forced them into residential schools. And then commodities. And commodities, I mean, I grew up on commodities. Commodities can have very low nutritional value, right? And so because of this, there's a prevalence of diabetes in indigenous nations, especially those who are confined to reservations, because of the fact that the food is mostly non-nutritionist. It's usually a food desert anyways. It's really hard to get food when you're living on reservations, or at least specific reservations within the United States, right? And those are the reservations that we see a high prevalence of diabetes. We have reservations within the United States where they might not have a doctor's office, but they have a dialysis center on the reservation right there, because well, you might have to go somewhere else to get Indian Health. You definitely need your dialysis every week, and that's the only way to get your dialysis every week. And that has nothing to do with the genes of indigenous people and everything to do with what indigenous people are force-fed across the United States and Canada. Right. And that's the thing. Even when they started out, like you can see pictures from the 60s where the chief of the, I think it was Standing Rock Nation, was forced to sign away their best fertile lands so that the river could be pulled through. That was one thing within Standing Rock, is that's part of the damming there actually took away many of the fertile lands that the nation there had. Right. So, I know many people that you would define of as white who aren't. It's not about your skin color. It's about the concepts within society, right? Most people in Nordic, now don't get me wrong, I mean, there are many people in Finno-Scandinavic countries that are, still very racist against the Sami, right? When the Sami, and we froze again. Yeah, it's just, it comes back and forth. It's been freezing on me a lot. I think I want to take that differently. So the Ainu are the indigenous population of Japan, and the Ainu are actually rounder of eye and light of skin. And I would not call the main population of Japan white, right? Though many might define the Ainu as white, right? So when we're looking at that, Jake, take your wabu shit out of my chat. When we're looking at that, we see that it's not about your race, it's about the concepts of your society, right? It's not about race, it's about the concept of society. There are, and it's about your inability to change the concept of society too, right? You should be willing to change the concepts of society. You should be willing to adapt and grow in the conceptualization of your society, right? So race has been debunked. It's a colonial construct. It is not a valid scientific thought process. It does not exist. Oh, Neanderthal and Homo sapiens, absolutely. Like their DNA, Neanderthal DNA is in the vast majority of Homo sapiens. So we know that Neanderthal and Homo sapiens, yeah, and Sami look very Caucasian, right? I mean, most would not define themselves as such, and most people in Scandinavia would not define them as white, right? But Sami would be defined by anybody in the U.S. as white. I've literally watched Sami people be like drug on TikTok by people who are in other indigenous communities who are not aware that there are indigenous people out there who would be considered by people in the United States to be white, right? So I would say, so I try and avoid classification, period. I identify by culture or identity or nation, right? I think it is important to, if I personally identify as a culture, then it is important for other people to acknowledge that identity. It's just like if I personally was not a two-spirit and I personally identified as female and everybody saw me as female, it's important for everybody to acknowledge that I'm female, just as important as it is for everybody to acknowledge me as being two-spirit and having a masculine identity and a feminine identity. Those things are all important. We should acknowledge somebody as being who they are when it lines up and when it doesn't line up with our personal ideology, right? It's always about people self-identifying as themselves. So I would say culture, and I specifically would refer to nation, right? Like if I was to talk about, I try not to talk about nation, like I try not to talk about different indigenous nations. I'm not a culture keeper in any nation. I don't believe that that's my space or my place, right? So I wouldn't talk about many different nations. If I was like somebody in here was talking about a specific nation, and if I was to go, yes, I've heard of that within that specific nation, right? If I am to talk about indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, I might say indigenous groups of the Western Hemisphere. Within the United States, Black Americans are a group, right? That's an entire cultural identity, right? Forced upon them, right? Like in that space, and has its own issues within that identity, but that's a powerful choice made by a marginalized group to identify as something, and that is their right to do so. And so that's how I would identify them, right? The land did mold its inhabitants, absolutely. Indigenous is about people being, so indigenous actually has a definition. Let me read you the UN definition of indigenous, or at least a little part of it, because it's a very, very long definition, but part of this is really important. And outside the United States, there is a different definition for indigenous than native. The Swedish people are native to Sweden, and the Sami people are indigenous to Sweden. These are two different groups. They arrived at the same time. Native in this case is the group that's government is in charge. Indigenous is people who create or have maintained That's the challenges. Let me see if I can find the actual definition. And that's right. So it's not what I wanted. I don't know if I can pull it all up completely, but there it is. Understanding the term indigenous. What is developed to actually state what is indigenous? Self-identification as indigenous people at an individual level and accepted by the community as their member. Historical continuity with pre-colonial or pre-settler societies. Strong in surrounding natural resources. Distinct social, economic, or political systems. Distinct language, culture, and beliefs. Form non-dominant groups of society, and resolve to maintain and reproduce their ancestral environments and systems as in distinctive peoples and communities. And where is it? Haha. Indigenous peoples are the holders of unique languages, knowledge systems, and beliefs, and possess invaluable knowledge of practices for the sustainable management of natural resources. They have to be defined as indigenous. They have to maintain a connection to the land as being a part of their culture. That land-based connection dominates spiritual, dominates cultural practices, dominates societal practices, and it is that connection to the land. So you can become indigenous to space by being in a space and becoming a member of an indigenous community within that space that you were not prior a member of a community of, right? That happens. You can't create a new indigenous group at this point, though. It's just not how that works. Indigenous groups are the indigenous groups who have been able to maintain that connection, a spiritual and societal connection to the land. Sometimes they've been forcibly removed from the original space. That does not make them any less indigenous. And they maintain that connection to, it's termed as an animistic understanding. An animistic understanding is an understanding that the land, the biome, the entirety of the world is alive, is interactive. And that animistic understanding, that mix, right? White isn't a culture. And that's the problem that a lot of people really get to, is many people are using white as a thing. First of all, you use Caucasian wrong. Caucasian is North African. Caucasian is the Arabian Peninsula. Caucasian is the Levant area. That is what Caucasian is. Caucasian literally means brown people. Like, that's not what the word itself means, right? But Caucasian was originally determined to define what we would today define as brown people, right? No worries. We can talk about it a little bit. And so when we look at that, many people misuse that term. The term you're looking for is Aryan, but I wouldn't recommend you use it. This is from a debunked classification of race, right? The term Caucasian is part of a debunked system. And even before it was debunked, it was considered to be shitty. It was considered to be problematic. It was considered to be something we shouldn't be using anymore, even before it was debunked, right? That's a great way to put it. Orla says this perfectly. They're considered white due to their ancestry, but they are Irish American. You can be European American. You can be Scottish American. You can be Celtic American. Kind of can't be like, I'm not Irish and I'm not Scottish, right? I mean, I know my father's Scottish clan. I'm still not Scottish. Scottish is a nationality, right? But you can be Scottish American or Irish American, or you can be Celtic American, Germanic, Anglo-Saxon American. These things give you the ability to kind of distinguish yourself as not being white, right? Because this is about your ancestry. A big part of being white is about having a disconnect. Now, it's not the forced disconnect that we see many other people having gone through, right? It's a chosen disconnect. And that chosen disconnect from the ancestry and this focus on capitalistic thought processes, and this focus on exploitative thought processes, and this focus on possession, right? Really doubles down on the culture of white, right? Because white is it's not a skin color defined culture, right? It's a cultural concept that is seen in a majority of white Americans, yet it is still a concept that has little to do with skin color and everything to do with buying into a bad system, right? And so, and also with choosing not to define yourself by your ancestry, but choosing to define yourself as American above everything else, right? So when we're looking at that, we absolutely can see. I know for a lot of people, it's really hard to. So if you are an accomplice, if you are somebody who might not belong to any marginalized groups, but you're really wanting to make sure that marginalized groups are no longer marginalized, right? Abiyala would be the one of the 5 original names that we know of for South America. It's really hard when you might not be a member of a marginalized group, but you're trying to actually support marginalized groups, right? To try and identify yourself and define yourself as trying to not be the problem, right? You don't want to say, well, I'm not the problem, because then you might be the problem, right? But you want to say, well, I'm trying to not be the problem. I may still be the problem. Please help me identify where I'm the problem. I'm trying to not be the problem, right? It's very difficult. That's one of the reasons that I come into TikTok, is to try and give. I was asked to come in here to give accomplices a way to connect to their own ancestry, because many accomplices want to reconnect without appropriation. They want to find their own ancestry, so they're not appropriating indigenous ancestry. And that's one of the reasons that I come in and talk. It's a very difficult thing for many people to do, right? One of the ways to do it is really take a deep study into, like, if you have any clue where your ancestry comes from, pick one of the spaces that you think your ancestry comes from and take a deep dive study into that. I would say a more obvious space, right? Like if you've got a great great grandmother who's Cherokee, I would recommend that that's not your first deep dive, right? But I would state instead that your first deep dive, maybe maybe one of your ancestors is English. Maybe you deep dive into the history of England, right? And maybe you deep dive into who the indigenous people are in that space. The Celts are going to be indigenous groups in that space. There are certain indigenous groups fighting for recognition as indigenous groups in the island of Britain right now. Cymru, the Kennewick, which are Cornwall, and Cymru is Wales, and Scotland, which are also groups of Celts, right? So there are different indigenous groups fighting for recognition there. Maybe you don't think that you belong to one of those indigenous groups. Maybe you think that your ancestors were Anglo-Saxon, so maybe you take a deep dive into the Germanic Anglo-Saxon thought processes, right? So that would be my start of trying to find, where to find your own ancestry, so you're not culturally appropriating, and that's something we talk about in here sometimes. The other thing that I would state is that to start, when you're looking at identify as, instead of I'm white, I'm European American, right? One thing that I've heard a lot is that for many different groups, the fact that I have to say I'm an indigenous American, or I'm a Black American, or I'm an Iranian American, and white people just say I'm an American, makes them feel a little bit like they have to define themselves a little bit more, right? So actually stating I'm European American, or I'm Irish American, or I'm Anglo-Saxon American, or I'm Basque American, different things like this actually show a solidarity, right? And they also show that you are not working towards the current, you're working towards the past, right? You're trying to find ancestry, you're trying to find reconnection, you're trying to find accountability, right? No, Daniel. Unless you have a new study that I have not seen, that is not correct. So definitely, I that's a hard one for many people, right? And then some of us, absolutely, Orla, there are many of us who are out here absolutely maintaining. I mean, when I got told when I changed reses and got told you can't be native, you're a pretendian, and I went, oh, well, I don't want to harm other people. Okay, well, if I'm not, I'm going to go somewhere else. I went and looked towards my Irish indigenous heritage, right? I knew that Irish were indigenous people. I knew they had faced colonization already. So I went and looked at that because I was like, I know I'm indigenous. If you're saying I'm not a member of your nation, that's fine. I know I'm indigenous. I'm going to find, you know, and so I think that that's absolutely the way to do it. Like you find and you maintain connection. Today, like I won't teach people how to connect ancestrally. Like, I mean, I'll show you how to find your own, but I'm not going to tell you, well, I utilize this and this and this and this. And so you should utilize this and this and this and this if you're Irish American, because of the fact that some of the things I utilize come from Ireland, and some of the things I utilize come from Africa, and some of the things I utilize come from Turtle Island, and some of the things I utilize come from India. Some of the things I utilize come from Australia, because I'm intersectional. So I'm not going to tell you, you know, you should utilize this because I'm going to utilize 10 different things that you might not be singing to the right ancestors in the right language with, right? So you go and you find, and for many of us, if you are European American, it might be a little bit hard sometimes, but for most of us, there is some knowledge, right? Most of us know that we came over here from somewhere, right? So if you start with even the base area, you know, I came from England, I came from France, my parents were Germanic, great grandma came over on the Mayflower. Well, that would be England by way of Dutch, right? You know, like, so you might go to those spaces, even if it's just a broad thought process, right? And it's just a better way to try and be self-accountable, as well as, like, there's a power in knowing your ancestry. There's a power in knowing who you are. An internal power, like your voice feels better. Your center of self feels better because you understand how to speak to it better, right? Epigenetics is huge, right? The imprint of what your ancestors went through on your bones is huge. So if your ancestors went through the Irish potato famine, say, you might, you know, have this history imprinted in your bones of starvation that makes certain things necessary, right? So absolutely, all of Europe was colonized. So when we look at colonization, okay, so I was going to go on to that. So I'm going to touch it really quick, but then I'm going to go because I've been going for like 2 hours and it's really hard for me to go long. Colonization really starts with that rise of violence. So colonization, starting with the rise of violence, we see the rise of violence really spread around any agricultural area, right? Our monocrop agricultural based areas, cities based agricultural based areas. But we see that starting in the Fertile Crescent, right? So we see that starting in Iraq, and it spreads from there. And it starts there around 10,000 years ago, and it spreads from there. That does not mean that's the only place. We do see it in Kenya. We do see it. It's either Northeast Africa or in the Levant. But we do see it in a couple of different spaces, not just in the Arabian Peninsula or in the Iraq area, the Arabian Peninsula, the Fertile Crescent. As we see that rise of violence spreading across, that rise of violence is colonialism. That is every step of the way this need to. So when you get to that point that people can own land, like I can possess land, it belongs to me. It's not its own thing, right? So now I start possessing land. So now I start taking land, right? And then I start spreading my concepts, right? Colonialism, colonization is, let me do I've said this one before, but, you know, just so everybody knows, there are 3 methods of movement. There's, and for humans, especially, there's migration, immigration, and colonization. Migration is when you're moving into an area where nobody's at, or you're moving along a yearly plan that you always move on. You might have a summer house somewhere and a winter house somewhere, which happens in many indigenous groups who actually are considered hunter-gatherer groups, right? So migration. Immigration, you move into a space that is already populated, and it might just be you and a few of you, it might be you and a bunch of you. You adapt to the culture that is already there, and you take part of the culture that is already there. Think of immigrants coming to the United States and becoming senators, right? This is immigration. Colonization is I go into a space that's already occupied and I replace the thought processes and the governments with my own thought process and my own governments. This is always done through violence. It is always done through subjugation. And it's always about replacing a society's thoughts with your own thoughts. So colonization, hello, beautiful. So colonization is starting when we see that rise of violence and we see that rise of agricultural-based cities, because we have this idea and we want to control more and we want to hoard more. And if I can control more and I can hoard more, then I can have more, then I can have more, and that's how we get here, right? And we kind of went 5 different ways from Sunday today. We had a lot of different conversations. All of my lives are on YouTube. The YouTube thing is gone. It's been gone, apparently. All of my lives are on YouTube. This whole live has been on YouTube. And Widda Ord is the YouTube, just, straight and Widda Ord. You can get to it. If you can't find it that way, you can get to it through my website. It's on the website that is in my profile, right? So if you've missed part of this live, if you want to watch any of the other lives, I go over all of these things several times. I've talked about indigenous science, many different things. So there are a lot of different lives with a lot of different information on there. I'm going to go ahead and go, though, because I try and keep down to around 2 hours because for my health. Before I go, I try and say a couple of things. And so I'd like you to stay around for a little bit longer. We went into it a little bit today, but biologically, we are nurturing and communal as a species. We know this because we have what we call mandatory midwifery, which means we need assistance in giving birth to our children between the shape of the head and the shoulders and the pelvic outlet, and the fact that we had to turn them twice to get them out. And so we have to have other people to help us give birth. This means we must have community. We must have nurturing from the moment we're born until 25 years currently, which is full brain development. We have 5 life stages between neonate and full brain development at 25 years, the longest of any species out there. Neanderthals only had 4. They're the only other ones with mandatory midwifery. Because of this, we must nurture our children through this period. And we can't just depend on one person to nurture a child. We've never been able to have one person nurture a child. Not even 2 people can nurture a child. Even today, if you are a single mother, it still takes a grocery store worker, a farmer, a truck driver to get the groceries to the grocery store, a daycare worker, somebody who makes your diapers, somebody who makes your formula, somebody, it still takes 30 people to raise a child from neonate to adult today at minimum. It has always taken many different people with many different skill sets, with many different nurturing capabilities to raise a child from neonate to adult. And many studies have shown this as well. Recent studies have shown that actually raising children on a communal basis is much more healthy. And they see this in nations among the Yoruba actually still that are living like that, right? So when we see this, nurturing and communal is absolutely the base biological drivers of our species. We've also touched in here about how we're creative, right? How we adapt our adaptations, how we're natural scientists, and that's who we've been since before we were this species, right? Since we were Homo erectus. Because we are biologically nurturing and communal, these are things that we must have for living. Like, to be alive, we must have nurture, we must have community. To healthily live, a child must have somebody nurture them or they die, right? Because of this, by drawing breath, you are alive. Life starts at first breath. There's many scientific and biblical facts that state that life starts at first breath. It does not start at first beat of the heart that's not there. It starts at first breath. Okay, so by drawing breath, you are given the things that are necessary to be alive. Those are basic human rights, right? We know that. Your rights are the things that are necessary to be alive. It is necessary for you to have nurture and community. We live in a society that teaches us that nurture and community is wrong. We've been gaslighted to believe that acts of love are in fact acts of hate, and acts of hate are in fact acts of love. So most of us feel very separated. Most of us feel very disconnected. Many of us know that there's a problem, but we can't figure it out. So we think we might be the problem. Most of us are depressed. Most of us are anxious. Most of us are not safe and we don't feel safe. And most of us think it's because of us. And I just want you to know today that you are not the problem, that you are having a healthy response to an unhealthy society. This is an unhealthy society, and you are having a healthy response. Okay. This is health. For you to be in pain as you watch children die, that's a healthy response, right? So you are not the problem. And very, very, very literally, if you can't see the problem, you can't fix the problem. So you're part of the solution because you see that there's a problem. I want to remind you today that you are worthy of love and compassion and care just by drawing breath, just by being alive. You don't have to be exploitable to anybody to be worthy of the basic needs of safety, of humanity, of compassion. You don't have to be exploitable to anybody for those things. And you are worthy just by being here. You might even be of more worth because you recognize there's a problem and you're trying to find a solution, right? So please today take care of yourself. Give yourself love, give yourself empathy, give yourself compassion. You deserve it. And so often there's not anybody giving it to you. And I'll see you soon. Much love to all of you. I love you just because you're alive and breathing, right? I love you until you prove me, yeah, I shouldn't. I love you just because you're here. So much love to you. And for many of us, we think that nobody around us loves us. I would invite you to realize that there are people around you who love you, whether you realize it or not. It may not seem like it. Sometimes that's because of them. Sometimes that's because it's hard for us to see love. But I would like you to know that you are loved by people around you, even if you can't see it. You are loved and you are worthy. Love you guys. Take care. Have a great one, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care, YouTube. Have a great one. Thank you for staying the whole way through.